Get everybody to have a seat and we'll get started. We took a little pause there. We didn't want to jumpstart the agenda. If anybody's logging on and their expectations are we start at 9 Pacific time, then we wanted to make sure that we started on time and didn't chip anybody out of a great presentation. I may say so myself. So as a prelude, let me just say thank you to everyone who's here and everybody online. Appreciate you joining. A lot of great relationships, a lot of great friends in the room and online, so appreciate that very, very much. What we're going to do here is just go over the results of our very first State of Our Community survey. So what you should know is that we entered into, we're a curious group, right? So we decided not working to advance. You can go ahead and advance it because this isn't working. There we go. Okay. The technology is working now. So we're a very curious group and we wanted to know, we had 3 objectives, some things that we wanted to know, but and they're listed. But what I'll tell you, the overarching theme, certainly for today, but in the survey was as well, was is very community centric. So when we were asking questions from the perspective of what do our community leaders, what do our communities think? So we wanted to learn more about what community priorities are. We wanted to learn that from community leaders specifically. We wanted to judge, what our impact was. We weren't doing that from a, self evaluation kind of perspective, but we were looking at it specifically from what do our community members think. And when we talk about opportunities to collaborate, we really wanted our communities and community leaders to lead that conversation. So we have some ideas, but what's really important to us is to learn from our communities. So thus was the survey. It wasn't a long survey, but it did surprise us in some ways, and it was reassuring in others. The testing methodology was pretty simple, pretty straightforward. We sent the survey out to about 635. The number is close, so I think we've said 650, 635. And if you know Niagara, you know that we've got KPIs for everything, right? So we set the goal of a 20% return rate. So you can imagine we were pretty satisfied that we had a 24% response rate. That was very pleasing for us. And, we anticipate, that response rate will go up in coming years as we do this again. And people get more familiar with what we're looking for. But we got insights from just about every plant community that Niagara is located in, and more. There were some respondents that are not necessarily located in a plant community, but have worked with Niagara in a partnership means in a couple different perspectives. So getting their input was equally important to us as well. So you're going to see some recurring themes in terms of findings, and we'll get a little bit deeper into, get below the surface, if you will. We've learned a lot from this survey. As I said, some things were reassuring, others were a little bit of a surprise to us. What jumped off the page for us was this question about Niagara being seen as a job creator. So it's an interesting perspective because by and large, 49% of the respondents see us as a job creator. But the scores of 1 and 2 on the bottom end were interesting to us. And so about 23% of respondents, really don't see us as a job creator. And one of the things that we're tempted to do is attribute that to some of the legacy locations where we have plants that have had very stable employment and haven't grown or added any significant numbers. And that might be, a reason we can attribute those scores to. But we'll look into that a little bit more. Big themes were better communication. You can see that throughout. Our partners are looking for enhanced, improved, and more frequent communication with Niagara. And that can come in the form of our team. It can come in the form of our plant teams. We found that communities were very generally aware of Niagara's involvement in communities. But one of the things that stood out was even though they had in their heart and their head that we were a pretty good corporate citizen, they oftentimes had difficulty putting their finger on exactly some of the things that we've done. That may just be, at my age, I chalk that up to bad memory. It may just be, there's some vagueness over time as to what we've been involved in, but we see it as an area where we can focus to. One of the things that I was pleasantly surprised to see was, there were a lot of economic development officials surveyed, and y'all are very proud of the work you do. The satisfaction with job creation was very high, and economic development efforts very high in general. So I think that was a bit reflective of the audience, and deservedly so, and then we saw a lot of respondents talking about generally infrastructure, but one of the things that jumped off the page of the results to us pretty strongly was this focus on hunger and homelessness. That is a pretty significant problem in a large percentage of the communities that we're dealing with. So that was one we feel like we're paying attention to and can probably up our efforts and do even more. So we asked our communities, what are your top priorities in the next 3 to 5 years? And not a lot of surprises here. The chart's a little bit unusual. It's the highest rank is down below. You can see pretty high expectations for economic development. But again, the two things that really jump out here, or I guess those top three: workforce, a lot of concern for workforce and workforce development insofar as training is concerned, enhancing skills. Again, infrastructure, and what we heard was roads and utilities. And then again, you'll see the hunger, nutrition, wellness, homelessness. That was also very high ranking. I'll be honest, we're gonna have to get our arms around the notion of workforce development. We have team members and plant teams that have really looked at that acutely. They've looked at that as a real focus area. They participate in workforce development boards and are very concerned about that in their local communities. But it's obvious to us that there's probably some room for improvement there. Again, the satisfaction with economic development, really high. And most community leaders and respondents to the survey recognized Niagara's involvement in that world. But again, a little difficult time putting their finger on exactly where those efforts and contributions are made. So that points to us, again, the need for a little better communication, a little more clarity in terms of our activities and the things that we're involved in. But that disconnect is something that we truly want to improve. But overall, a good score at 3.82%, or 3.82. That's not percent, but it's a rating basis. And we would, look to improve that in the coming years. This was a very interesting survey response to us. We asked about corporate sponsorship and what communities are looking for from Niagara when it comes to our financial support and partnership. If probably no surprise that the overwhelming response was over almost half of the respondents identified, direct financial support, sponsorship as being very, very important. And if you know at Niagara, we're not the kind of company that just strokes a check. We do show up. We're the kind of company that likes to be involved, directly. So putting a shovel in the ground, sitting side by side with a child in an after-school program, or painting, installing park equipment. We like to be hands-on. So that was interesting to us. And that's not to say that other types of financial support, like I just mentioned, aren't important. Those were identified as being equally important, but secondary to direct financial sponsorship. So that was interesting to us. And the one that really was a resounding result was, absolutely no interest in networking. I guess, if you're involved in communities from a leadership standpoint, you are immersed in a lot of networking activities. So nobody is looking to Niagara to facilitate networking. I think it's appreciated that we're oftentimes at the table, that we're in certain events, but there was no expectation really that we discerned that Niagara help facilitate networking in communities. So that was an interesting result, and that was again very convincing. Like only 8% of respondents mentioned that as an issue. So we talk about community impact, and again, pretty decent score here. Got pretty high marks for our level of engagement. But again, that issue of putting your finger exactly on what it is Niagara is involved in, you know, we see some room for improvement there. And that's just a function of communication, style, frequency, formats, methods. So we're hearing our communities loud and clear when it comes to this message. So beyond the quantitative assessments, we got some written responses, right? So we got some qualitative responses as well. And those were a little bit different than what the numbers showed us in the survey. In qualitative responses, it was very, very clear that the most pressing challenge is infrastructure. And that really came in the form of roads and utilities. You know, would like to think that there's not a lot of bias in that response insofar as Niagara is a beverage manufacturer, so water and sewer is very important to us. Hope that didn't, you know, lend itself to influencing any of the answers. But since it was mentioned pretty closely with roadways, feel safe that most communities are concerned with not only road and sewer, but electricity. You know, electrical service delivery in a lot of communities is becoming a real challenge, at least from a timing standpoint. And then it was followed very closely by housing, a lot of concern about affordable housing. And then, of course, workforce didn't drop off that list at all. And then funding, the financial support for economic development. I think anybody in an economic development organization is concerned with their sources of funding, whether they're a nonprofit or whether they're a government agency or whether they're, you know, a partnership between the two. I think that's front and center for most organizations. But it was interesting to see that the dichotomy, the difference between some of the qualitative responses and then the quantitative responses. They weren't exactly in sync. And it begged the question, you know, is there something else on our community leaders' minds when they rank, score something versus when they are allowed to freestyle and discuss something or write it out in their survey narrative? Little bit revealing to us in that respect. So we want to dig below that and make sure we understand it. So this is essentially a summary with a little more depth to it. The biggest community challenges, again, you know, rising rents and the lack of affordable housing, particularly for low income. That was a very high concern. And that wasn't one that appeared to us intuitively before the survey was done. So that was an interesting eye opener. Mentioned infrastructure being such a high concern. The notion that a lot of infrastructure in the communities where Niagara plants are located is aging, and there are challenges with, you know, funding its improvement. That was made pretty clear. And you know, there were some clear indications about the regulatory hurdles to addressing those challenges. So maybe that suggests, you know, the ability for business, Niagara certainly front and center, to provide testimonial in terms of what state and local governments can do to, you know, smooth out the process, if you will. If there is a willingness and open ears and open minds, we're certainly willing to contribute to that. We're going to have to get our arms around workforce development, as I said, because there were a lot of responses that pointed to, you know, a lack of talent or the ability to train. You know, Niagara does a fantastic job of recruiting, most oftentimes in partnership with local communities and workforce boards and workforce development professionals. But what we're not really involved in is, the broader workforce development scene. We don't really see a path forward in that front today. But we're going to look at it a lot harder because it's such an important priority that our communities have identified. That one will take some noodling. That'll take some work, and we are open to constructive input in terms of how our communities think we might be able to help. But we do a great job of finding employees and training them up and making really good Niagara team members out of them. Oftentimes for very, very long careers with a lot of development along the way. And we're proud of that because we've had people that start as a warehouse associate and are now managing logistics for an entire region. That's certainly the case in some of our plant communities. So how we extend that is going to be a bit of a challenge. So education and youth services being underserved, very specific needs identified in terms of K through 12 and after school support. We've done some great activities in those areas, but there's obviously room for more, and how we do that is going to be an important exploration as we move forward. But again, candidly, our focus when it has been in school-aged youth has been the college and high school. There's been a lot of suggestion that that penetration be even deeper into the elementary and middle school grades. So that's an interesting challenge for a manufacturer that's running a very complex operation where it's dangerous for anybody, or at least there's a certain amount of risk to being in a complex environment like that. But it's something we can certainly take a look at. And then budget constraints and policy barriers. A lot of regulatory concerns, things being at cross purposes to community goals. If there's any solace on this issue, it's knowing that communities are not alone. There are communities all across the country and indeed overseas that struggle with this same issue, reconciling the appropriate level of regulation and protection with making things easy, making things simple. And it's a balance that has to be achieved. I think Niagara's had some great experiences around the country as we've expanded plants and located new greenfield plants. If we can provide input that can help that process, we're certainly open to it. Community preparedness. This is an interesting chart so far. It represents a lot of the results you've heard, but the visual of the scoring is a little bit interesting here, where you see some of these same priorities that we talked about are summarized pretty well. Is the community prepared to address these issues? Economic development, I think everybody that responded felt really strongly about their economic development programs. Not so well prepared to deal with things like hunger and nutrition, wellness, homelessness. And the environment, that was a surprise to us. The environment, circular economy, recycling, that is a very high priority for our company broadly in North America and overseas. And most communities thought that they weren't really well prepared to deal with that. We definitely want to scratch below the surface on that response and learn more about that because we think we can contribute in a meaningful way. Again, education and school programs and infrastructure. Interesting response on disaster response. Niagara's been a part of just about every disaster response. We're on speed dial with FEMA and most first responding agencies in the communities we're in, and more broadly. Perhaps a little bit of a disconnect there that we can work on. We work for a third party typically when we're doing disaster relief. It's not a Niagara branded truck that shows up with relief supplies. It's typically done through a nonprofit that we have an established partnership with, and has a pretty strong handle on the chain of custody for product that's going into a community. So that was an interesting result as well. We asked our community leaders, how do you think Niagara can step in? We have some ideas, but we wanted to hear from our communities. How do you think we can step in? And we got some pretty interesting responses. I was very pleased to see the acknowledgement that, because I've used this term, I used it just earlier, was we're not the kind of company that just strokes a check. So I'm guessing that a community that I've been in heard me say this, that we know that stroking a check is not the only or the best way to engage, but they're looking for more of those partnership opportunities, and we can certainly rise to meet that kind of a challenge. Visibility. We're spread a little thin, but we are concerned about how visible we are in a community in terms of our efforts to support community initiatives. So that's an area that's real important to us. I mentioned developing the local workforce is going to be a challenge for us on that. And vulnerable populations, we've done some great things with Niagara Cares and our plant teams being involved in communities and working with vulnerable populations, whether it's elderly or whether it's youth or children at risk. We're going to up the ante there. Really pleased to see the comment about advocating for smart environmental policies. Again, that's a really high priority for Niagara, and it's something that we want to make sure we keep front and center. If there's anything that we're really, really good at, it's understanding the nature of our natural resources and the value and vitality of plastic as the best that science has to offer right now for beverage packaging and more. Don't feel the narrative about plastic has been fair, certainly in the last couple of years, and there's a lot of messaging that can be done to help improve people's understanding of how important and vital that PET is in food packaging and certainly in beverage packaging. So some recommendations. These are some of the things that we contemplate. We debated whether we should share these straight away because we haven't had the amount of time that we think is necessary to work on all of these issues, but we had some initial thoughts. And I'll give a great deal of credit to one of our trusted advisors, Marathon Strategies. They've worked with us to help develop the survey and cull through the results and helped us better understand the findings. So some of these recommendations were developed in partnership with them, and we've got good consensus on them. But I will say that it's a beginning point. This is not an end point. This is the genesis of a discussion on how we can move forward. But we obviously need to do a better job. That one was made really clear to us. How we communicate it matters in terms of frequency and format. Need to better define our role from an economic development perspective. If you're involved at all in the International Economic Development Council, Niagara's been very involved with IEDC, and you'll see us as a major sponsor this year with significant activities in their annual conference. So we're stepping up to meet that challenge. Again, how we participate in developing workforce, that'll be a challenge. When this session is over, you're going to hear more about talent. You'll hear from some of our key leaders in Niagara. But the thing that we really need to understand is, what you think about where we can be involved, and hopefully there's a connection, there's a crossover point, what we can do and can't do versus what communities need and don't need, and we'll find that inflection point. We've talked about community engagement. We'd like to think we're pretty good at that, but we're on the quest for perfection. So we're going to be taking a hard look at how we up our game in that respect. And then we clearly want to do more with respect to underserved populations, those in need, hunger, homelessness, wellness. And that's it. Yes, we got a little bit of time. We got a little bit of time for maybe address any questions if there's any in chat. I don't know if there's any in chat, but we left a little bit of time. We're at the bottom of my mic's running out. Is this a better mic? Okay, great. Dead batteries, wow. So if there's any questions or any follow-up, any curiosities, be happy to address them now. We've got a few minutes. We're at the bottom of the hour. We can address any questions that come up. Anything in chat? Good. Yes, sir, John.
For the mic.
You're gonna need the mic.
Yeah, John Sweatman, City of Opelika. I just love the fact that y'all have done this and you're being very intentional about it. I was wondering if there's an opportunity, you had mentioned maybe being able to take a deeper workforce development dive into the lower grades of schools in your communities. And then also the environmental focus that Niagara has. We struggle in our city with education, anti-litter education, and reaching our kids and teaching them, if they say mom and dad throw something out the window of the car, we want them calling mom and dad on it. So you shouldn't do that.
Right.
So I wonder if there's a potential partnership where Niagara could get in front of our pre-K, second grader, third graders with an education program that would expose them to Niagara, but also to this important issue.
I think there probably is. And John, I appreciate your comments. That's, you're not alone. Opelika is not unique in that perspective. We're hearing that concern across a lot of communities. So it would be interesting to, to expand that thought. We're going to be doing a lot to collect some more input over time and be able to address that in a way that hopefully is scalable, right? That what we do in one community is also, maybe applicable in another. And if not, then we customize. Dreeth, you had a comment. Want to steal this one?
Okay.
I'll give you this one. This one's working really well.
I was just going to add that, John, we do have some communities that do have some ambassador programs within their schools. And perhaps we can connect the two of you and you can also talk about how they've been able to get the kids engaged and to be able to help mom and dad and call mom and dad out in a nice way and not get in trouble. But we do have some of those communities that are doing that. And so, again, this is the opportunity where we can connect you all. That's one of the things is hearing and learning about it so that you can share information with each other. So we'll do that.
Thank you, John, for the presentation. So I agree for the K-12 outreach. What are your thoughts about just partnering on initiatives already that is happening nationwide, such as Manufacturing Month, which is where it's a month in October where communities across the nation open up their plants for tours for K-12 and for youth to learn more about manufacturing careers. We in Pierce County held our initial inaugural manufacturing day and had businesses come out in the manufacturing sector, from building I would say building materials, aerospace, advanced manufacturing, and they had the opportunity to, see hands-on and learn more about those careers early on. So it also would open it up to parents as well, because to get to children, you'd have to expose those opportunities to their parents.
You want to comment?
Sure, I'll start it off. This is Dreeth again. I'll start it off and then I'll pass it back to you, John, since she did ask you. I will say that Niagara does acknowledge Manufacturers Month, National Manufacturers Month in the month of October. And we do have some of they tell me I should be in the square. I'm in the square. And we do have some of our plants that are engaged in National Manufacturers Month. And historically, we've been a part of, we've got Florida, tell me, were you involved with In Between Florida Makes? This last year,
NIST MEP.
we've got NIST MEP that we're involved in. And even this last year, I'm going to give a shout out to Connecticut because they actually did a bus tour and got around where they actually went around a maid in Connecticut, and we did participate in that. So we do have some of our communities that are doing that. But again, it isn't necessarily consistent across the entire portfolio. But perhaps that's an area of opportunity where we can then tap into particularly those locations where we know have things going on, and we can do that. Because we've had, I know Seguin has done it as well, Texas, brought the kids in for Manufacturers Day. They started doing that years ago. But we're finding more creative and innovative ways to do that, particularly as we work with our partners at the state levels. To make those things happen. But would love to hear more from you and love to get you and Ron connected.
Manny, I really appreciate that question, and particularly from your perspective, right? I mean, you're an economic development professional, and your focus is business retention expansion. And it hasn't escaped our attention that this survey and the results we're seeing probably correlates with some of the business retention expansion surveying that's done in a lot of our plant communities. And there may be some opportunities for synergy there that we haven't fully realized or explored yet. So that's just another facet to this that it seems kind of intuitive, but we've got to figure out the way to match wits on some of these issues, because I think there's definitely going to be some crossover.
We have a question from Norma Michael. How can we get Niagara involved in community engagement in Jackson, Mississippi?
Jackson in the house.
Ruth, you have spent a lot of time in Jackson, and you're my VP, so I'm deferring to you.
Okay, so I wasn't supposed to be doing all of this talking. That's why John was facilitating this section. But hey, Miss Norma, how you doing? One of the things too is, and I hope a takeaway that comes from this summit is that we do a better job of listening. And Jackson isn't a place where we have a physical location, but it is a place that experienced some differences, experienced some challenges there with their water system. And we put a lot of product there. So you will later on today, you will hear about some of that partnership that exists there. But I think beyond that, one of the things that's interesting to me here is, and we got some of it from the survey, but we know that the survey was just the start, and that we do want to take a deeper dive and better understand some of these areas. We do want to have some focus groups and receive some feedback so that we're hearing some of the specifics from our communities, as John pointed out, John Swetney, as you pointed out. And I think we just need to learn because sometimes we always think we have the answers, but we don't. We think we know what works in a place, but we don't. And we also think that sometimes things are kind of cookie cutter, but they aren't. And we know that every place is unique and has its own priorities. And so we just need to do a better job of where we have presence. And presence doesn't necessarily mean physical presence, but in a way it does, because our product is everywhere. And so we just need to do a better job of pulling those parties together. I know there are a lot of you, and particularly even on this call today from Jackson, that took time to join the call, that are very interested in the work that Niagara is doing and how we can be better partners. But I think it's also interesting to understand the work that our communities are currently doing and how we might be able to help better stand some of those things up. Because we've been in a room with a lot of community advocates before in places where we've heard things and we've learned things that we didn't necessarily know even existed. So I think we just need to do a better job of listening and bringing those folks together. And one of the things that we've had in our plan for a minute is just to hold more focus groups. We need to get back out. We need to re-engage ourselves. We need to reintroduce ourselves in a lot of our communities so that people aren't just seeing us when we get ready to expand or when there's an issue that's going on there, but you all know us and you pick up the phone, or when we call you and there's just a response there. Again, it's all about sustainable relationships. And I hope that that's what this summit will put us in a mindset to do. So thank you, Ms. Norma, for the question.
And the session that Dreeth mentioned is actually the next session up at the top of the hour. So when we're finished here, we need a little bit of a break to massage the technology and bring up the next presentation. But those opportunities abound. And as Dreeth said, we just need to make sure that we're capitalizing on them, that we're working with our partners in a way that benefits them and and fits with Niagara's model as well. You had an afterthought.
Yeah, I do have an afterthought there. Ms. Norma, I know that you have a neighborhood association. I will tell you that is an area that I would love to know more about in communities, neighborhood associations, because that gets us right down to the people. That gets us right into neighborhoods and not just in groups of people that may be just within our wheelhouse of economic development or elected officials and so forth. I used to work with neighborhood association groups years ago in a previous life, And so I would definitely love to know more about that because we know that there are certain neighborhoods and communities that are more active than others. And so I think getting to know our neighborhood associations would be an awesome step for us as well.
Yep, so that next session is entitled Building Reciprocal, Community Comes First, Building Reciprocal Local Partnerships. And you're going to hear from a couple of folks that have some wonderful experiences to share. You should note that if you want to log into that session, as Dries said at the opening, we've designed this these 2 days so that you can plug in and plug out. As she said, we didn't want to hold anybody hostage for 2 days straight, right? So you have a unique link to that in the mail out materials. So when you log back in, you'll use that link for the next session. Community Comes First, Building Reciprocal Local Partnerships. Any more questions? Anything in chat?
Not necessarily a question for me, but I know there's some other people that are online because they text me and said, hey, I'm online and you didn't introduce me. So
You want to take, we got time
So I
to do
just
that.
wanted to say, we see you, we hear you, and we appreciate that you joined. And I did get the text message. So thank you.
So that's great. All right. So we're going to pause, take a little break, and we'll start again at the top of the hour. Thanks, everyone.